So do we have him on Zoom now? Yes. Okay. Hi, Patri. This is
Hello. Oh, you're muted. So I guess it's all me. Let me start the presentation.
Sustainable Floating Nation. Here you go, Patri.
All right. That should be my screen. Okay. See if this works. Hey, I'm Patri Friedman, and like Lane said, I've been working a long time, over 20 years, on how to upgrade governments for more innovation and how to improve faster using these tools that Elaine mentioned. And since I've been around for a while, I'm going to use my history in the sector to introduce some of these tools for innovation. So after college, I chose to live in Silicon Valley, and there were great things about it, but I really wasn't happy as a citizen. There were two main issues. First, I'm a libertarian, which means I tend to be progressive on social issues and conservative on economic ones. And in the US and most of the world, these really aren't mainstream beliefs. So there's no mainstream party representing them. And in a democracy, that means there's very little chance that my values will be enacted. And the second issue is just quality of service. Like I can walk into any store in a mall here in America, and I get way better customer service than if I visit the Department of Motor Vehicles. Way better. But this doesn't have to be. If I visit a place like Estonia, Singapore, or Dubai, it's different. The government actually functions efficiently as if they care about me as a customer. But, you know, that said, those countries weren't right for me because they didn't match my values. And in fact, I looked around the world and there were, you know, different packages, good and bad, but I didn't really find anything that really matched my values and was well run. And so that got me started thinking and researching about why this might be true and how to fix it, you know, originally so that I could live in a country that was right for me. But eventually I realized it was much bigger than that. And if we could enable governments to innovate and upgrade, then lots of different people could live in countries that were right with them. People with totally different beliefs than me could maybe create communities that became countries around their own beliefs. So to understand this, I turned to economics and political theory. And, you know, as a tech guy in the Valley, there's definitely some startup concepts there too. And I'd say the brief summary of my theory is that old ways of change that work within the system can only bring small improvements. That's important, but at the same time, we need a way to test ideas for big upgrades. And eventually, we need to be able to start new countries that are intentionally designed from scratch to serve their citizens well, kind of the new technologies, just as representative constitutional democracy, what became the industry standard because it was way better than what came before. I want to find the other forms of government, the new forms of government that weren't even possible 100 years ago, forms that use the internet, for example, that might have changed things just a little bit. And I want to find those. So this requires experiments, and we have some examples. So today's regulatory sandboxes in the US and Europe are a much weaker version of this idea, where they let select companies test ideas under more flexible regulation for a limited period of time. Dubai pioneered the kind of modern zone approach of changing out part of government, which is actually what I work on now. Back in 2004, they created the Dubai International Financial Center. This was an area that had totally different commercial law than Dubai and the rest of the UAE. And it was even in a different language. It was English. They copied them from London and modified them. And another thing that we based our work on was in 2009, Nobel laureate Paul Romer, he pitched this idea of charter cities and his take on the economic benefits that was, you know, partly based on what Dubai had done, but expanding it in new ways. And what we needed was not just one or two examples, right? The need to upgrade government, the need to test new rules and institutions. This is needed all over the world. So what I was thinking is that I had to find some repeatable way to help any country that wanted to do this. And so the first period of my work in the 2000s was focused on building on the ocean. Back in the early 2000s, I was in two small group discussions. One was about starting countries, and the other is about floating cities. This was before Dubai and before Romer. And so these ideas about trying out new systems of regulation, new institutions, they were much too new to bring to nations. I mean, not even close. But given that, I realized that maybe we could create new jurisdictions and maybe even someday startup countries if we lived on the ocean. I mean, after all, a lot of governance innovation has always happened on the frontier. I mean, that's how America started. And maybe if modern engineering could enable ocean life, open up a new frontier, then we could unleash a huge wave of innovation, trying out all kinds of things and finding some that worked way better and bring governments, laws, and institutions into the 21st century. One example of this, I got a little bit of validation, as in 2002, this cruise ship launched, the World. It was the first and probably the still only that was designed for full-time residency traveling around the world. Unfortunately, the unit sold so poorly that the management company actually sold it to the high net worth residents after a year and a half, but they've kept it running ever since. So in 2003, I wrote this paper about the theory and economics of the global governance market and why there's so little innovation and how startup cities might change that. I joined Google in 2004. And in my spare time, I read a whole book on this idea of seasteading, started building a little community. And eventually I was funded by Peter Thiel in 2007 to start a nonprofit around this called the Seasteading Institute. It was the first modern nonprofit, as Elaine mentioned, that was talking about these ideas for how to make new institutions. And the funding from Peter Thiel was kind of the beginning of this alliance between tech and new innovative zones. I mean, look, we who want to upgrade governance, we want innovation, we want new things that work better and not just in theory, but are actually built. And Silicon Valley Tech was the place in the world to do this, the place that picked ideas that seemed crazy, the right ones, and then built world-changing companies around them. This idea was way too big for any one person or nonprofit, so I traveled the world for several years, creating a new movement and community around these ideas. One thing I hadn't expected is that it didn't just attract innovators, but it turned out there was a whole world of people with their ideas about how to build better homes and cities and societies for sustainability and self-sufficiency. And they had their own technologies they wanted to use, their own sustainable energy plans or new home building technology. And they were hungry to test these ideas. And it was really hard to, because what they needed was to build communities from scratch with other like-minded people. And I also spread this crazy idea enough that it was made fun of by The Onion and the Colbert Report. And to me, the combination of support from someone like Peter Thiel and being made fun of by the mainstream told me that I was definitely on the right track. So with this startup mindset, I decided that the next step was leaving the institute, finding someone else to run it, and to start a business which would complement it so we could put these ideas in practice. An early PayPal employee and I started exploring the concept of a cruise ship for medical tourism. And then the Honduras Zeta program was launched. It was just incredibly groundbreaking. It was the first program in the world where regulators would select private companies to administer zones like in Dubai that had their own commercial law. Of course, being part of Honduras, these zones were under their constitution, all of their treaties, and used their criminal law. The failure of the world cruise ship as a business shows the downside of the ocean. It's an incredible place, but it's difficult and expensive to build there. Now, we saw that cost constantly falling as technology improved, and we'd really hoped that we could speed it up and find ways to make it affordable. And the Seasteading Institute is still doing it. But what I saw was an opportunity to create a new jurisdiction on land and work with the host country. So with several co-founders and funding from Peter Thiel and others, I started a charter city company, probably the first, working to build one of these zones in Honduras. But after a year of work, we realized that we were too early. Honduras had changed their constitution, but they hadn't allocated any budget yet. And this was a really new program that was going to take quite a bit of work to bring to reality, years probably. So we wound up the company, and it wasn't until 2017, actually, that they really got going. And meanwhile, a team from the Seasteading Institute founded Blue Frontiers, which worked with French Polynesia for a seastead near shore with its special economic zone. They were planning to build just off Tahiti, but eventually there were elections and people said, hey, that might be an eyesore on our beautiful island. So they were given the opportunity to start fresh with a different island if they could get the mayor's agreement, but they just hadn't raised enough money to continue. And by the way, French Polynesia is a great example of delegating regulatory authority for those who are having trouble understanding, right? There's the EU, which has some regulatory authority over France. And then France, which is sovereign, delegates some of its sovereignty to French Polynesia. It gets some independent. And then each island within French Polynesia has really significant autonomy that's passed down from the colony. And so there's actually this whole stack of jurisdictions. Another example is countries that delegate a narrow area to a private company. You could say Liberia with its flag registry. And there are many more examples of these public-private partnerships. Anyway, so I went back to work at Google, actually, while this was happening. The movement kept growing. It had new leaders, and there were a bunch of new nonprofits created. The Free Cities Foundation, the Startup Societies Foundation, and the Charter Cities Institute. And what was strange was that there was an unexpected generational effect happening as the high school and college kids who heard my ideas in 2008 were now in their 20s or early 30s, many of them successful entrepreneurs. And the next milestone was 2017, when the Honduras program was finally operational, and they gave the first preliminary approval to Honduras Prospera. Seeing that this was actually really happening in the physical world led me to start Pronomos Capital, which is the first investment fund for these innovative zones and charter cities. It's anchored by greats from Silicon Valley like Peter Thiel, first check from Balaji Srinivasan of the Network State. We have incredible investors like Mark Andreessen, Joe Lonsdale, Naval Ravikant. And our first check, actually, before we even formed a legal entity, was to Prospera in 2018. And then our first check after we launched in late 2019 was to Prospera to lead their Series A, because they're really the leader in doing this kind of thing on land. And over the past 4 years, we've invested in and worked with quite a bunch of companies. So besides Honduras Prospera, there's the Praxis Society, which has 15,000 people who want to build a society together, young, ambitious entrepreneurs. And they're actually talking to Italy and Greece right now about locating there. There's Etana in Nigeria, founded by E, who started 2 of Africa's 7 unicorns. Etana is to be a tech hub in Nigeria with better governance and reliable infrastructure. Etana recently got the first digital special economic zone in Africa, which offers incorporation and e-residency. There's Small Farm Cities building in Malawi. They have a full stack solution to turn empty land into profitable farming communities. They're growing like crazy, and they're going to build a network of villages that turn into a network of small cities and begin innovating in governance, building regional hospitals, and continuing to grow. And of course, our most recent investment in Click-Through Prospera, that's Small Farm Cities, and our most recent investment in Metropolis. I met Martin 5 years ago and I saw an extremely like-minded visionary with his own really interesting ideas on how to bring this stuff into practice. It's been a real pleasure to be a small part of the Metropolis team and contribute to the innovative programs they're working on here in Palau. For me, having been around so long and starting with so little, it's just amazing. I'm amazed every day to see how this sector of trying to upgrade and innovate in governance has gone from theories to reality. As we say in Silicon Valley, right now, it's time to build. I and my portfolio companies are working with a dozen countries around the world who know that in the 21st century, success requires innovation. I think we have every continent except Antarctica. Among these countries, of course, is Palau, where I've had the pleasure of working with President Whips on what the best approach is for this country. I've been very impressed with how open-minded he and the rest of you are to these new ideas. I'm excited to build things together, and I know that some of you are too. Thank you.